Imagine a simple live broadcast. No grand stage, no complicated choreography, just the 7 members of BTS sitting casually in front of the camera. Yet in this seemingly ordinary moment, ARMY noticed something extraordinary. Without speaking, without a single word, Jimin gave a small gesture to Jungkook, signaling him to sit beside him. At first glance, it looked trivial. But for ARMY, moments like this are never truly small. As the live went on, the atmosphere felt light and relaxed. Soft laughter, casual conversation, familiar expressions that fans have seen countless times. Jungkook was initially sitting a little apart, quietly listening. Then, in a moment that many casual viewers might have missed, Jimin glanced in his direction. There was a brief hand gesture, almost instinctive. Jungkook noticed, smiled softly, and moved to sit right next to Jimin. There was no explanation, no dramatic reaction, and yet that was exactly what made it powerful. Sharp-eyed ARMY immediately felt a shift in energy. Once Jungkook sat beside Jimin, the mood became warmer. Jimin looked more at ease, his shoulders slightly relaxed, his smile appearing more often. Jungkook also seemed comfortable, laughing along and occasionally glancing at Jimin as if to check that everything was okay. And so the question began to spread, quickly filling the comment section. Why did Jimin ask Jungkook to sit next to him during the live? To understand this moment, we need to look beyond those few seconds and into the relationship they have built over many years. Jimin and Jungkook are not just members of the same group. They grew up together, through harsh trainee days, the pressure of debut, exhausting schedules, and the unrelenting spotlight of global fame. In interviews and behind-the-scenes content, their closeness often shows not in grand gestures, but in small habits, the way they call each other, joke around, or simply choose to stay physically close. In psychology, there is an interesting concept. People instinctively seek a safe zone, especially during live broadcasts, where nothing can be edited and every moment is exposed. The pressure is real. And in situations like that, we naturally want someone nearby who makes us feel comfortable. For Jimin, Jungkook may be that safe zone. Not because of dependence, but because of trust. Jimin knows that with Jungkook beside him, he can simply be himself. There's no need to overthink, no need to put up emotional walls. There's a quiet sense of I'm not alone, difficult to explain, yet deeply felt. What's also telling is how Jungkook responded. There was no hesitation, no questions, no exaggerated reaction. He simply moved and sat down. That kind of immediate, natural response suggests something important. This was not their first time communicating without words. Longtime ARMY know this well. Jimin and Jungkook often communicate on a non-verbal level. Eye contact, subtle smiles, small gestures, these are enough for them to understand each other. This live broadcast was yet another example of that unspoken connection. Some fans speculated that Jimin might have been feeling tired or emotionally drained. Not in a negative sense, but in a very human one. The pressure of schedules, public expectations, and the responsibility of being global idols can be overwhelming. In moments like that, having someone familiar close by can make a huge difference. Still, it's important to remember that not every moment needs to be overanalyzed. And that is exactly where the beauty lies. This moment wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no confessions, just a small gesture that reflected a deep friendship. A closeness built not for the camera, but through years of shared experiences. What touched ARMY was what happened, but how it happened. Nothing felt forced, nothing felt staged, it was completely natural. After Jungkook sat beside him, Jimin smiled more often. At times, he laughed freely, even when the conversation wasn't particularly funny. Jungkook became more engaged as well, occasionally chiming in with light comments. Their dynamic flowed effortlessly, like two people who are deeply used to sharing space. ARMY began comparing this live with previous ones, and a pattern emerged. When Jimin and Jungkook sit close together, the atmosphere often feels warmer and more relaxed. This doesn't mean Jimin isn't comfortable with other members, but this particular pairing has a unique energy. There's a sense of mutual care. And perhaps that is the answer. Jimin asked Jungkook to sit beside him not for any grand reason, but for the most human one of all: comfort, safety, familiarity. In a world that constantly demands perfection from them, moments like this remind us that behind the global superstar image, they are still human, people who need emotional closeness. ARMY don't fall in love with BTS solely because of the music or visuals. They fall in love because of honest, unplanned moments like this. Moments that aren't scripted, aren't staged, and therefore feel real. So when we ask, why did Jimin ask Jungkook to sit next to him during the live? The answer may be simple. Because in that moment, that's what he needed. And Jungkook, without saying a word, was there. As the live broadcast continued, many viewers may not have consciously registered that brief movement: Jimin's subtle gesture, Jungkook's quiet response. Yet long after the live ended, that moment lingered. Clips were replayed. Screenshots circulated. Comment sections filled with interpretations, emotions, and quiet admiration. What seemed insignificant at first slowly revealed itself as something far more meaningful. This is often how the most powerful moments happen with BTS. They don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive softly, almost unnoticed, and only later do people realize how deeply they resonate. The moment Jimin asked Jungkook to sit beside him was not framed by dramatic music or highlighted by captions. It unfolded naturally, without intention to perform. And perhaps that is why it felt so genuine. In the world of idols, where nearly every movement is analyzed, planned, and rehearsed, authenticity has become rare. Fans have learned to distinguish between what is staged and what is instinctive. This moment fell unmistakably into the latter category. What stood out most was not the gesture itself, but the comfort that followed. As Jungkook settled into his seat next to Jimin, there was a noticeable shift, not just in posture, but in presence. Jimin leaned back slightly, his shoulders easing. His smile became more frequent, less guarded. Jungkook mirrored that ease, occasionally laughing, nodding, and staying engaged without trying to dominate the conversation. They didn't speak about it. They didn't draw attention to it. They simply existed in that shared space. And that in itself spoke volumes. For many ARMY, this moment brought back memories of earlier days, times when Jimin and Jungkook were younger, less burdened by global expectations. Back then, their closeness was often more visible. Playful teasing, shared laughter, physical affection that came naturally. As BTS grew bigger, the world around them changed. Their roles expanded. Their responsibilities multiplied. Yet moments like this remind fans that some things remain unchanged. Their bond has matured, but it hasn't faded. To understand why this moment felt so significant, we have to consider the environment of a live broadcast. Unlike pre-recorded content, live streams carry a different kind of pressure. There are no retakes, no edits, no filters to soften mistakes. Every expression, every pause, every silence is real-time and unfiltered. For idols who are constantly aware of their public image, this can be mentally exhausting. In such moments, comfort becomes essential. Psychologists often describe comfort-seeking behavior as an unconscious response to stress or vulnerability. Humans gravitate toward familiar faces, trusted companions, and safe emotional anchors, especially when they feel exposed. In that sense, Jimin's gesture was deeply human. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about fan service. It was about instinct. Jungkook, in turn, responded with equal instinct. There was no hesitation, no performative reaction. He didn't turn it into a joke or call attention to it. He simply moved closer, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That kind of response cannot be faked. It suggests a level of understanding built over years, an understanding that doesn't require explanation. This is why many ARMY describe their relationship as quietly deep. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to be validated. It exists in the small, unspoken moments. As the live progressed, fans began to notice other subtle details. The way Jimin occasionally glanced toward Jungkook before speaking. The way Jungkook listened attentively, sometimes leaning slightly in Jimin's direction. These weren't grand gestures, but they created an atmosphere of mutual awareness. There was no sense of distance. And in the context of BTS, where each member has a distinct dynamic with one another, this closeness stood out without overshadowing anyone else. Importantly, ARMY were quick to emphasize that this moment does not diminish the bonds Jimin shares with the other members. BTS is built on a foundation of strong relationships, each unique in its own way. What made this particular interaction special was not exclusivity, but sincerity. It was one moment between two people who share a long history. And history matters. Jimin and Jungkook trained together during formative years. They experienced uncertainty, fear, and hope side by side. They navigated the anxiety of debut, the pressure of expectations, and the sudden weight of global attention together. Those experiences leave marks that shape how people connect and support each other. In interviews over the years, both have spoken about how much they rely on the members emotionally. Though they rarely single each other out in dramatic ways, their actions often speak louder than words. This live broadcast was one of those times. Some fans interpreted the moment as a sign of reassurance. Others saw it as a reflection of habit, two people who naturally gravitate toward each other without thinking. Still others viewed it as a reminder of how deeply intertwined their emotional rhythms are. None of these interpretations cancel each other out. In fact, they coexist. Because human relationships are rarely defined by a single meaning. What made the moment resonate so strongly was how relatable it felt. Many viewers saw themselves in it, those times when you don't ask for help verbally, but simply seek closeness. Those times when someone understands without needing an explanation. That universality is what turned a simple seating change into an emotional focal point. It reminded fans that BTS's connection is not just professional, it's profoundly personal. As discussions continued online, ARMY shared why the moment touched them so deeply. Some spoke about loneliness and how small gestures can mean everything. Others reflected on friendships where words aren't necessary. Many expressed gratitude for witnessing something so genuine in an industry often criticized for artificiality. This wasn't about creating narratives or forcing meaning. It was about recognizing authenticity when it appears. And authenticity has always been at the heart of BTS's global appeal. Their music resonates because it speaks honestly about emotion. Their presence resonates because it feels real. Moments like this reinforce why fans continue to trust them, not just as artists, but as people. As the live drew to a close, nothing dramatic happened. No explanation was given, no highlight was replayed, and yet the impact remained. Sometimes, the most meaningful moments are the ones that aren't addressed. They exist quietly, leaving space for reflection rather than answers. And perhaps that is why this moment continues to be talked about, not because it demands interpretation, but because it invites it. So when people ask, why did Jimin ask Jungkook to sit next to him during the live? They are really asking something deeper. They are asking why this moment felt so human. Why it lingered. Why it mattered. And the answer lies not in speculation, but in empathy. Because at its core, this was a moment of connection. A reminder that even under the brightest lights, people still seek warmth. A reminder that strength doesn't always look loud or confident. Sometimes it looks like quietly asking someone to be close. In the vast timeline of BTS's career, this moment may seem small, but small moments often carry the deepest truths. They reveal what words cannot. They show us who people are when they aren't trying to be seen. And in that brief, wordless exchange between Jimin and Jungkook, fans witnessed something rare and beautiful. Not a performance, not a statement, but presence. In the end, perhaps the reason this moment stays with us is simple. Because it reminds us that behind the fame, the stages, and the expectations, BTS are still human beings who find comfort in each other's presence. Jimin didn't need to explain his gesture. Jungkook didn't need to ask why. In that quiet understanding, Army saw something deeply familiar, something true. And maybe that's why this moment won't fade easily. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't told through words, but through where someone chooses to sit.